Barakata Yahweh, Barakata Yahushai, Ba'ishim, Barakah Kudash, Barakatum. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, glory, and infinite honors to Yahweh, Ba'ishim, Yahushai. Double honors to the apostles and elders, a great millstone who rule and teach well, and peace and salutations to you Akim out there, pushing this word in truth and sincerity to the four corners of the globe. May you brothers endure until the end. This is the Brother Raya with another video, and I'll be reading from an article on RT.com titled, U.S. to help legitimate Latin American governments to prevent protests from morphing into riots, says Mike Pompeo. And this is just going to be another video revealing the nature of you Edomites, or so-called white people, that you are the devil or the deceiver that the Bible speaks of, because you Edomites never do anything for the well-being of the people, especially the Israelites, or the so-called Negroes, Latinos, or Native Americans. There's always an ulterior motive. It's always about power, greed, rape, robbery, and murder. And these other nations of people around the world are starting to wake up to that fact. That's why they're starting to turn against you, and all your plans that have worked in the past are starting to fall apart. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has said that the U.S. will help legitimate governments in Latin America in order to prevent protests from morphing into riots. And legitimate governments is just code for governments that are sympathetic to our goals, puppet states that will allow us to steer the foreign policy in that country, as well as rape that country of its resources. Pompeo made the comments while delivering remarks at the University of Louisville on Monday. He declared that U.S. policy of rape, robbery, and murder in Latin America is based on moral and strategic clarity, meaning Washington cannot tolerate regimes it deems unsatisfactory in the region, regimes that aren't playing ball to the U.S. government or these U.S. corporations. Pompeo said that protests in Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, and Ecuador reflect the character of legitimate democratic governments and democratic expression, and that governments in the region should respect that. But what they don't tell you is that countries like Bolivia are rich in natural resources like gold, silver, oil, tin, lithium, etc., etc. And the leader who was just ousted, Evo Morales, wasn't playing ball with the U.S., so they had to set up their new puppet, who a little bit afterwards started opening back up relations with the U.S. government, as well as building up ties with the state of Israel, who's the puppet master of the United States of America. Will work with legitimate governments to prevent protests from morphing into riots and violence that don't reflect the democratic will of the people. This is Psalm 58 verse 3. The wicked, you Edomites, the border of wickedness in Malachi 1 and 4, whom the earth has been given into the hands of in Job 9 and 24, are estranged from the womb. They go astray as soon as they be born, speaking lies. You Edomites are the perpetual can't-do-rights. From coming out of the womb, all you can think about is wickedness, lying, deceit, getting over on people, etc., etc. So to you so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans out there, never trust an Edomite, because they always have some ulterior motive to get one over on you. One of the brothers in my camp made a beautiful point. How do you know when an Edomite's lying? When his lips are moving. Pompeo added that the U.S. will continue to support countries trying to prevent Cuba and Venezuela, countries who also haven't been playing ball with U.S. policy. So that's why the U.S. is sending all their agents of chaos into that country to try to overthrow their leaders and set up that puppet that will play ball from hijacking those protests. He also accused Russia of malign influence in Latin America and of propping up the democratically elected Venezuelan government of Nicolas Maduro, who was elected 2 times by his people and was handpicked by Hugo Chavez, who did more for his people than any other leader in Venezuela, who were all just following U.S. dictates. The eyebrow-raising comments come in the wake of the November coup in Bolivia, which saw socialist president Evo Morales ousted, while violent protests and attacks on politicians forced him to leave the country. Opposition leader Janine Áñez has since declared herself as interim president. The opposition-led protests began all over alleged election irregularities. Pompeo's distinctly frank comments are an admission of sorts that the U.S. will encourage violent protests and regime change where it deems a government to be illegitimate, but will work to quash anti-government sentiment in countries it sees as obedient allies, as puppets. While the U.S. wholeheartedly supported the Bolivian coup, as well as coup attempts in Venezuela earlier this year, it has all but ignored anti-government protests in Chile, where it blames malign Russian and Chinese influence. In both Venezuela and Bolivia, Washington supports the unelected, self-declared interim presidents. They're undercover agents. Pompeo concluded by saying there remains an awful lot of work to do in the region, referring to Latin America as the U.S.'s backyard. He also warned against predatory Chinese activities in the region, which he claimed can lead countries to make deals that seem attractive but are bad for citizens, similar to the deals that the U.S. was doing with a bunch of Latin American countries in the 20th century, which led to those countries being mired in debt because they couldn't pay back those U.S. corporations who said they would build up infrastructure in the country, all at high interest rates. And that's the main topic of a book I always like to bring up called The Confessions of an Economic Hitman, which shows how these Edomites in America really get down with you third world country peoples, especially you so-called Latinos who are of the northern tribes, and why you should never trust these Edomites. This is Psalm 55. I'm going to read verse 20 to 21. He hath put forth his hands against such as be at peace with him. He hath broken his covenant. You Edomites are historically known for reneging on peace treaties and deals that you do with people. Just look at the so-called Native Americans or Gadites in North America. You made peace treaties with them only to turn around and slit their throats. You stole their lands, gave them diseases, and put them onto reservations. You even do it to your own. Hitler made a non-aggression pact with Stalin during World War II, only to turn around and invade the Soviet Union, which led to the deaths of 20 million Russian citizens. Or for a more modern example, look at Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. Gaddafi agreed to halt his nuclear program for better peace relations with the West, only for NATO and the U.S. to do a police action on that country, and that led to the overthrow of his government and him being sodomized with a bayonet on the international news. And now Libya is nothing more than a balkanized, failed state, which is much worse off now than when it was under his rule. Same with Iraq. The words of his mouth were smoother than butter, but war was in his heart. His words were softer than oil, yet were they drawn swords. Back in that article. Will work with legitimate governments to prevent protests from morphing into riots and violence that don't reflect the democratic will of the people. The words of his mouth were smoother than butter. We care about the freedom of all. We care about the democratic will of the people. But war was in his heart. What we really want to do is overthrow this Latin American government that isn't playing ball with us. We need to set up a puppet that will follow our dictates and allow us to rape that nation of its resources. And now I'm going to play a video on the YouTube channel Thom Hartmann Program titled New Confessions of an Economic Hitman to show that I'm not blowing smoke up your ass. If there's one thing GMS will tell you is to do your own research. This video shows that what I'm telling you is the truth. It's an interview with Tom Perkins, who wrote the book Confessions of an Economic Hitman, which details U.S. policy in third world countries, how they go there and make deals with the leaders to rape that nation of its resources. And if those leaders don't want to play ball, hey, they overthrow them and get somebody in there who will play ball. And as always, I highly recommend you brothers check out that book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman.
I'm really pleased to have in the studio with me the former chief economist at a major international consulting firm where he advised the World Bank, the United Nations, the IMF, the U.S. Treasury Department, Fortune 500 corporations, governments in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East. He is now an activist and author. His latest book, New Confessions of an Economic Hitman.
They've got a new Confessions of the Economic Hitman now, which I'm going to have to check out. It adds an additional 15 chapters to the original book.
It is John Perkins, his website, johnperkins.org, his Twitter. You can tweet him. Jeez. At economic_hitman. And just an FYI, for those of you in the Washington, D.C. area, John will be speaking and signing books at the World Affairs Council of D.C. tonight at the California Washington Center, all-purpose room on Rhode Island Avenue. And on Thursday evening at Busboys and Poets in Hyattsville, Maryland in the Zinn Room. Both events, 6:30 p.m. And you can get all the information over at johnperkins.org, because these are not the only two things John's doing. He's basically doing a book tour all across the country for his new book, The New Confessions of an Economic Hitman. John, it's so nice to have you back on the program. It's been a while. It's great to see you again.
It's great to see you, Tom. Thanks so much. I love what you're doing.
Thank you. So, first of all, for people who may not remember our last conversation, which I think was more than a year ago, and certainly several years ago, maybe 5 that your first book came out?
The first book came out 12 years ago.
12 years ago.
And we've talked since then a few times, but yeah.
So that was basically, we started the show 13 years ago, so it must have been pretty fresh. What is an economic hitman? And what did you see and do as an economic hitman, and who else is in that hierarchy?
Well, I think, first of all, an economic hitman, the main thing that I did, that economic hitmen do, is to identify countries with resources our corporations want, like oil, arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sister organizations. That money then goes to our own corporations, not to the country, but to our own corporation to build power plants, industrial parks, infrastructure projects that make a lot of profit for those corporations, and help a few wealthy people in those countries, the ones who own the industries, the commercial centers. But the majority of the people suffer because the money is diverted from health, education, and other social services to try to pay off the interest on the loans. And in the end, they never pay off the principal.
So you as an economic...
Habakkuk chapter 2 all day. This is Habakkuk chapter 2. I'm going to start at verse 4. Behold, his soul, Esau Edom's, which is lifted up, is not upright in him. The wicked are estranged from the womb. They go forth speaking lies as soon as they be born. But the just shall live by his faith. Yeah, also, because he transgresseth by wine, or his philosophies, such as democracy or globalism. He is a proud man, neither keepeth at home, who enlargeth his desire as hell, and is as death, and cannot be satisfied, neither keepeth at home, going into these Latin American countries and setting up shop. And if the leader of that country doesn't want to play ball, then they'll just set up a puppet that will and allow them to continue to steal that nation's resources, enlarging their desire as hell, but they cannot be satisfied. These Edomites are never satisfied with what they have. They always want more. That's why they want to bring about this new world order and have this entire planet on lockdown. But gathereth unto him all nations, and heapeth unto him all people, not just the U.S., but Esau Edom's entire beast system, that fourth kingdom, the reincarnated Roman Empire, which is the EU-NATO alliance. Whenever these Edomites get their tentacles in these countries, they set up an IMF central bank, which sets up the SWIFT system, which means these countries really can't do business outside of the U.S. dollar. And then eventually it's going to go from the U.S. dollar being the main monetary system to the microchip implant, which is the mark of the beast. Verse 6, shall not all these take up a parable against him, and a taunting proverb against him, and say, woe or destruction to him that increaseth that which is not his, how long? And to him that ladeth himself with thick clay. And when we go to that word clay in the Strong's, it's
Strong's H 5671, avteet.
Avteet. Weight of pledges, heavy debts. And what did John Perkins just say? Let's go back a little bit.
On the industries, the commercial centers, but the majority of the people suffer because the power plants, industrial parks, infrastructure projects, sister organizations, that money then goes to our own corporations, not to the country. I think, first of all, an economic hitman, the main thing that I did, that economic hitmen do, is to identify countries with resources our corporations want, like oil, arrange a huge loan to their country from the World Bank or one of its sister organizations. That money then goes to our own corporations, not to the country, but to our own corporation to build power plants, industrial parks, infrastructure projects that make a lot of profit for those corporations and help a few wealthy people in those countries, the ones who own the industries, the commercial centers. But the majority of the people suffer because the money is diverted from health, education, and other social services to try to pay off the interest on the loans. And in the end, they never pay off the principal. So
That thick clay, those heavy debts, woe to him that increaseth that which is not his. How long? You Edomites can't get around these scriptures. They fit you like a glove. That's why you want to take this word off the internet and then eventually come after the men of the Lord on the highways and byways. But it's too late. You're going to go out of power, and the Israelites are going to rule for eternity.
So you, as an economic hitman, you go to a country and you say to the leader of the country, take this giant loan, build a big dam, build a power plant, whatever. You're going to be a hero. You're going to help develop your country. And what happens if they say no?
Well, you're going to make a lot of money.
Oh, and you personally, we're going to make you rich.
Yeah, and all your friends and family. Yeah,
right.
yeah. And if you
The words of his mouth were smoother than butter.
don't, well, remember what happened to Salvador Allende in Chile, and remember what happened to Arbenz in Guatemala, and Mossadegh in Iran, and Lumumba in the Congo. These are all people who didn't play the game, and they were either assassinated or overthrown in coups. So it's pretty clear to a government leader, either take the money and get rich in the process, or get thrown out. And I know that if you get thrown out or assassinated, you're going to be replaced by someone who will play the game. So what's the
But war was in his heart.
choice?
When you were an economic hitman, did you talk to any world leaders who said no thank you and who were then later assassinated by
Two of my clients, Jaime Roldos, democratically elected president of Ecuador, and Omar Torrijos of Panama, who became a very good friend. And I had tremendous respect for these two men because they didn't play the game. And yet it also meant I wasn't doing my job, and I also was worried for them, and both of them were assassinated because they did not play the game.
So when the hitman can't talk him into it, the jackals come in and take him out.
Exactly.
Which are CIA hitmen, assassins.
And if the jackals can't do it, as with Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi in Libya, then the military goes in.
So we get
The Leviathan Force, the U.S. military.
our way no matter what. And
Yes.
we being not just the United States of America, but the corporate. Is this exclusively a corporate agenda and the government of the United States and other major countries? Because I know that this is in a way this is kind of the old colonial Europe model. They would take over a country in Africa or in the Middle East, and they'd say to the leaders, play along. And if the
Nothing
leaders
new
said
under
no,
the sun.
bang. And one of the few who actually stood up successfully was Gandhi. I think he's probably the only one. But in any case, is this mostly being driven by corporations and the governments go along, or is this being driven by government policy that helps the corporations, but there's some rationale that it's best for the United States if that oil that got accidentally put under the sand in Iraq, which is actually our oil, that we simply go recover it.
Yeah.
He is a proud man, neither keepeth at home, but enlargeth his desire as hell.
Well, I think, that's the excuse to choose. It's best for the United States. But the truth is that globally now it's big corporations that run the whole system, including in China
Which are mainly run by Edomites.
and in much of the rest of the world. That the big corporations have so much control. They control governments. And also one of the reasons I wrote the new Confessions is that 12 years after the first one was written, things have gotten much worse. This whole economic hitman system has spread from the developing countries, where I work primarily, to the United States, Europe, and the rest of the world. And in fact, it's created a failed global economic system, what I call a death economy, that's based on militarization, fear, debt, and the destruction of resources. And we have to change it.
So economic hitmen are now coming after targets in the United States?
Absolutely.
For example?
Well, all the debt that we have, I constantly...
The snake eating his own tail. These devils don't even take care of their own. So how much more you so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans?
run into students. I do a lot of lecturing at MBA programs and law schools and other university programs. And I constantly hear students say, I'm getting my MBA because I really want to do something good. I want to have kids. I want to create a job. I want to be an entrepreneur and create a business that's going to clean up the pollution, that's going to help mine the plastic in the Pacific, or something along those lines. Oh, but I just discovered that I should have figured this out before, but I owe $200,000 in education debt. So I'm going to have to go to work for a big corporation for a few years to pay off that debt. What I know is once they get into that system, they're probably going to fall in love, marry someone, buy a house, have kids, go deeper and deeper into debt, and probably never get out of the system. And the system's set up that way to bring them in. On top of that, we've got credit card debt, we've got health insurance debt. We don't have good health insurance, so people go deep into debt to get taken care of when they're sick.
Back in 1951.
That's it with the video. You get the point. You Edomites are finished. You've been revealed to be the man of sin and the son of perdition, so all you can do is sit back and wait for Yahweh by Hashem Yahushai to return and save the elect of his people and put the final nail in the coffin of your rulership. So with this video, I hope you sincere Akim were edified. Just keep strong and keep pushing this word. We're almost out of this final wicked captivity of the heathens, chiefly Esau, Edom. And as always, I'm going to say Abba Ball, Kwam Yasharala. Till next time, Shalom.